Hey friends, today's tutorial is all about needle felting pictures. If you're brand new to needle felting, or if you've been needle felting for a little while and you're just looking for that next level guidance, this crash course on needle felting pictures is just for you. We're going to go over how to pick a subject and what size should you work in when you first start needle felting pictures, what canvas or material are you going to work on, and how do you get your design onto that canvas, a variety of techniques to do that. We'll cover the tools you need and not the ones you don't, so you don't spend too much money or spend money needlessly. We'll also talk about fibers and wool consideration for needle felting your first pictures, and I'm going to give you my top 10 tips and techniques to keep in mind when needle felting your pictures. We'll cap it all off with a rundown of projects and ideas that you might consider for your next needle felted picture, and most of those have a tutorial to go along with them and maybe even a kit. So stick around and let's have some fun. I promise to cover everything I can think of in this topic to help you get started, including everything I wish I knew when I first started needle felting over 20 years ago. Really, to date it, since around the turn of the century. The last one. Now you don't need to keep notes because we're going to give you a PDF down below that you can download, and I promise if I forget to say something that's really important, I'll put it in the PDF, so make sure you grab that and you'll have all the material that we cover today, including links to the things you just gotta have. Number one is to keep it simple. If you're an absolute beginner at needle felting pictures, choosing a subject that's simple and easy to do is going to ensure that you have success right out of the gate and begin to teach you things right from the start. So your idea might just be a doodle or freestyle design that you do from your head. It might be inspired by a picture you've seen or even one that you've drawn. You could also work from a photograph that you've taken yourself, or even just an inspo image you've seen somewhere. And you can also start with a kit or a project that somebody else has already designed. Whatever you do, just go for simple first and treat it as a learning tool for your next project or your bigger idea. Number two is to start small. Trust me when I say that practicing a small needle felt picture first is going to be a game changer. And by small, I mean something smaller than a sheet of notebook paper or smaller than the size of our regular 8x12 wool felt sheets. We do projects that are like 8 inches square or 6 inches square. We've even done some that are 4x4, and others that are that medium size. We've started with a miniature like a 2-inch square so that you start to learn how to do the artwork, to get yourself set up, how to work with your tools, how to work with your fibers, and just build some confidence around working out your colors and ideas in a small scale. Plus, once you finish with that little miniature, you have something fun that you can either keep or give away. You could turn it into a fridge magnet or a backpack pin or stick it on the face of a greeting card. So start small at first and learn the fundamentals. That's really key. Choosing the canvas for your very first picture will really be dictated by what you want to do with that picture. Is this something that you want to put behind glass? Then you could use something like our wool felt or our linen. Both of those are great fabrics for taking, whether it's dense or light applications of fiber with needle felting. They don't shrink very much at all. That will depend on the density of the amount of fiber that you needle felt into it, and they don't pucker. And even if they did get a little wrinkled or warped, they'll press beautifully when you're all done. So those are two high quality fabrics that will lend themselves to quick success for needle felting pictures. So you'll want to think about that final application. Are you wanting to wrap your picture around a dimensional or even flat artist canvas? The linen is probably a better idea because it's going to wrap so well and not be bulky. Are you wanting to have a refrigerator magnet or a brooch that kind of has some density to it, like it can hold itself up, has structure, strength, I'm trying to find the words, then try the wool felt, and you could always end up backing it with something else. But both of these fabrics are really going to get you started with great success. You may want to be needle felting onto like a canvas tote bag or a denim jacket or a pair of jeans. And if that is your goal, my first suggestion is to try a sample piece of fabric that matches that same fabric weight, so density of the fibers and the weave, so you can test out your image transfer, which we'll talk about in just a minute, and the fiber application. So always start with a sample if you're going to be needle felting into something permanent. People ask us sometimes if they can needle felt into a prepared like painter's canvas, and the answer is no. And if you try, you'll find out why. It's just too much resistance, too taut, and sometimes they're treated, you're going to damage, bow, bend, break your felting needle. So that's not really an option, but you can needle felt a picture first and then wrap it around that artist canvas. And we do have a video for mounting and framing your artwork. I think we've done a couple of them. So check our needle felt pictures playlist for that. The other thing people ask is, can they use craft store felt? Look, if you're doing a budget project with a bunch of kids or like a free community project, yes, by all means use, the cheapest felt you can get your hands on. But if you're wanting to needle felt something with a lot of detail or a lot of fiber, like a portrait or a landscape or like a pet portrait, you're going to want the quality backing. And the reason why is because it will not pucker and wrinkle and shrink. So test out your ideas on cheap craft store felt, and you'll see what I mean, how resistant it is to the fiber, how it tends to pucker and distort, and how thin it is. It's almost see-through in some cases. So just try it and you'll see. And if you're frustrated with that, well then try this 100% wool felt or even the linen, and I know you're going to be impressed and you're going to be encouraged to move forward. So test everything, but know that there are great solutions out there, and the linen and the wool felt both work great. Now we need to get our artwork onto our canvas. There are a few ways to do that. The simplest, most basic way to do that for a basic picture is to get lines right onto your fabric. If you can freehand it, then do. You can do that with a pencil or a pen or the type of pen that disappears when you wash it, only if you're going to be washing or covering that pen 100%. And there are even pens that disappear when you iron them. But I do hear that they show back up in freezing temperatures, so that may not be ideal. Either way, I'm going to suggest that you needle felt over your lines 100%. My absolute favorite way to get a design onto your background fabric is to use the iron-on transfer pens. I discovered these when I very first started needle felting, and I had to hunt for them years later. We carry them, they're amazing. I use black, I use brown, sometimes I'll use orange or whatever. All you have to do with this is print out your line art, so in this case, the reverse. Trace over the image around all the lines that are important to you. So if there's a cactus in your picture that you don't want, don't trace over that. You'll trace over the lines that are important to you, lay that face down onto your fabric, and use a hot, dry iron to transfer that image onto the fabric. It's amazing, it's empowering, it's fantastic. Tips are to get your placement so you have it exactly where you want it, and that will depend on the final project that you're doing. So if you want to wrap something around a canvas, leave plenty of border. And we have a few tutorials where we look at suggestions and ideas. For example, I like to tape off my border because I don't see the world straight and I need to get my image straight. So I'll tape it off with masking tape so that I get my picture centered and have plenty of room to sew or mount my fabric or piece. There have been times when we flipped over a mat and used that as a border. Sometimes we cut the piece and mount it onto an artist canvas. So there's lots of considerations. You just want to leave yourself plenty of room in the border if you're going to be cutting it, sewing it, mounting it in some other way other than mounting that piece end to end the way you've needle felted it. So give that a little consideration, and honestly, all these ideas are going to come into your mind when you're needle felting your first pieces, and maybe the tutorials that we share will give you some thoughts as well, so you take those into consideration. Having a border is really helpful if you want to, take that piece to a different incarnation. Now, if you have a more complex image or ideas for more complex images, we do have suggestions for that as well. Our beach huts, we show you how to take basic guidelines for how you lay out the landscape and then use felt or paper guides of where to put your beach huts. With our fall barn, we show you how to layer a complex image without using the iron-on transfer pen, and instead you're doing cutouts and you're drawing onto your canvas. We've also done layering, where we create a background and then we use the iron-on transfer pen on top of that. So Try out one of these projects that I'm going to share with you in a minute that are of interest to you. And you know what? We'll list those in the PDF, or at least list where you can go find the playlist and see it in case you get lost. It'll all be in the PDF. So again, if I forget to say something, I'm going to put it down there. So lots of ways to transfer your image. Super fast, simple is to draw over major lines in your picture and use that iron-on transfer pen. It's my absolute favorite way. Basic needle felting tools for needle felting a picture. This is so easy, y'all. It's not complicated at all. I love using fine felting needles. As an adult, for a kid, I'm going to suggest something just a little bit different. But as an adult, I choose our 42 triangle, our 40 triangle, and I only go up to the 38 family, 38 star spiral, or 38 triangle when I'm working with coarser wools or denser things that require denser compaction. And the reason why is I like to make sure that when I'm needle felting my picture that most of the wool is sitting on top of that fabric and then maybe just below the surface. I'm not trying to push a bunch of wool through to the back and into my work surface. So finer felting needles allow you to use the minimum amount of wool you need to get 100% coverage and create your design. If your fibers are coarser, or you're going for that, dimensional coarser, then you're going to need to kick up your felting needles a little bit, maybe into the 38 range. The reason to stay away from the 36s and the 32s is just like I said, you're going to push too much wool to the back of the canvas and just waste it. And you can damage your foam if you're working on foam. If you're working on our wow mats, it's just going to resist it and not want to take that fiber in. So stay fine. If you're working with children, just go for 38 triangles. Kids tend to, as they're developing control, they grab onto things really tightly and they wrestle with, being delicate. If they're older kids, fine. But if they're younger, go with a 38 triangle. Plan that some will break with absolute beginners, not because needles are supposed to break, but because people are learning how to use that tool. Stay fine on the felting needles. You only need a few. For holders, you might like the righty tool. It holds a single needle. It's inexpensive. You can have them preloaded with the sizes you like. Also great for kids or anyone who likes that assist with dexterity. I like this Poquito tool. You'll see videos where I rubber band some 42 triangles together. Love that. Still have them in my drawers. I've even wrapped them with wool in some, and you see I put yellow wool on them. But now we have this Poquito tool, which holds 1, 2, or 3 felting needles. Super easy to use and great. I just keep it loaded with 42 triangles. A pen tool is another option if you prefer something longer. The pink pen tool is almost just like the Poquito tool, except the spacing is just a little different, but they're super close cousins. Both will be fantastic as a multi-needle felting tool holder. Beyond felting needles, you need a work surface, a foam mat. If you're toe in the water or working with children, go with a 5x5. Doesn't matter which way you go, but choose something small. I like our wow mat. You'll see in older videos that I worked on our foam. We make that foam right here in the United States. It is made without chlorofluorocarbons, it's made without fire retardants, and it's made with over 65% recycled materials. So it is firm, it is great, it's fantastic, and it depends on your touch, how you like to needle felt. So it receives the fiber fine. It is possible for you to push too much wool through the back. So if you decide to work with the foam, we call it our Earth Harmony needle felting foam, then just stick with those finer needles. The wow mats, which is 100% wool mat, very, very dense. And I like it because it resists the wool, which is why some people don't like it, honestly. So you need to see what you like to work with. It resists the wool. So when I work with my fine needles, it pushes back. And that allows me to have a real light touch and allows very little wool to pass through to the back of the canvas. And you'll see when we take it off of the canvas, just how little fiber is not only on the back of the fabric, but how little fiber made it into the work surface. So I love working with them, and the best thing to do is just try and see what you like, and you can also iron your picture right on them. So you do need a work surface to work on. You do see sometimes that people have made a needle felt picture in an embroidery hoop. They don't needle felt in the embroidery hoop. That comes later. You want your fabric nice and flat on your work surface, whether that's foam or the wow mat. I do want to suggest that you don't needle felt pictures, or you don't attempt to needle felt pictures with a lot of detail or a lot of size on these mats that are really like a little pillow. They're not flat, they're bowed. And, you know, if you're just playing around and doing some fun, you know, swirly durly or, you know, doodle designs, that's fine. But if you're trying to needle felt something with a lot of accuracy and detail, that pillow is not going to support you. I'm going to share something in the tip in a minute that will also talk about this. Think about that roundedness or concave perspective. So I would say you do need a flat work surface, and I just want to make sure I mention that. When choosing wool for needle felting your first picture, we're going to suggest that for a quick start and quick success that you start with wool batting. We'd like to suggest our MC1 batting, our Bergschaft batting, and our Maori batting. All of these have beautiful crimp to them. They are relatively short staple fibers and will needle felt into your picture beautifully. Batting is how the fiber is processed. And that is when the fiber is processed on a drum carder. It's actually called a web, but only in the carding portions or the mill do we call it a web. Out in the world, we call it a batting. And we make these big lofty sheets, and the fibers are all mixed up going in different directions. These are ideal conditions for felting, whether it's wet felting or needle felting. Great for needle felting because the needle can easily grab onto them. Some other things that you often see with wool batting is that the fibers tend to be a little bit on the shorter side, often, and that they might even have a little more crimp. All ideal conditions for needle felting. You can also use roving, but I'm going to tell you a secret. And if you've watched our video on the different types of wool for felting, I make a big confession about this word roving. And that is, a lot of people misuse the word roving to talk about all kinds of things that aren't roving. There are plenty of authors, teachers, and sellers that honestly maybe don't even know that what they're calling roving isn't roving. Why do you care? If the fibers are all going the same direction, what happens is the felting needle tends to kind of want to slip right through. So if you have fibers that are all going the same direction, we're going to give you a tip in the tips and techniques for working with those. Wool is a great place to start, wool felt, and you can add some other embellishment fibers into what you felt. You'll see that we've done that like with our 2D mushrooms. We add all this kind of mossy goodness and we felt all kinds of fibers into there, but we trap them in with wool, mixing them in because those fibers don't technically have the scales that wool has on them that causes them to entangle. So if you're trying to needle felt something and it's just not grabbing on, it could be that it needs to be mixed up a little bit, or you need to blend it with a little bit of wool. If you get a kit from us, you will know what you get, you will know what the supplies are, and most of the time we're giving you wool or an embellishment pack, like I said on the mushrooms, and you can follow the tutorial and know what to do with it. So on that note, if you are trying to buy fiber on your own and do an a la carte process, I would say go for wool batting when you can get it, at least to start. But if you're following a kit, a teacher, or a tutorial, just use what they use and they will show you exactly what to do with it. Okay, here's my top 10 tips and techniques for needle felting pictures. The first thing is use shallow needle pokes. Just as we mentioned earlier, you don't want to push too much wool to the back of your picture. If you vary your angle as you poke that needle, you're going to leave less needle marks. Use your little group of needles, whether it's rubber banded or in something like the Poquito tool for that general compaction, and that will also help minimize needle marks. The more you needle felt everything flat and to the same level, the more you're going to minimize needle marks because you'll have the wool properly compacted. Number 2, go for 100% coverage. You don't want to see the canvas beneath the wool unless that's along the border or perimeter. So if your subject is floating in the middle like our little robin pillow or our mushrooms floating on the canvas, great. But you don't want to be able to see the canvas underneath your subject. Go for 100% coverage. Number 3, you can hand blend fibers to achieve different colors, different textures. and even to mix fibers up that are going all the same direction. So you can use your hands to blend them, or you can use little hand cards. So mix things up if you need to. It's absolutely encouraged, and you're gonna love the results you get. Number 4, you can cut your fibers. I really use it as a last resort, but sometimes the design just calls for it. And maybe you decide to make a little bit of a design and then snip the fibers and needle felt those right into place, like in our little mushroom scene. You can cut the fibers, but you don't have to always to achieve your design. Just know it's an option for you. Tip number 5 to get a straight edge is tack along that perimeter line with the wool sticking over, and then fold it back into the rest of that area and needle felt all that down. So you don't cut the fibers to achieve those nice straight lines. You'll needle felt that perimeter, fold it over, and then needle felt that all down. Number 6 is if you want to get a long line, what you do is you needle felt the tip of a long strand of fiber into place and then gently draft it out. By drafting, I mean you separate distance between those fibers lightly, not super taut. You want to draft it out, hold the tension loosely, and then tack it into place. So play with those 2 techniques for getting either a straight edge or a long line. Number 7 is that you can use guides to help you create complexity in your images. You'll see, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we use these like felt guides to choose where do I want the subject to be. You might use paper guides to sort of plan where things go, and you can use paper guides to create complex layering of images. So use whatever you can think of to help you achieve the image that you're going for. Number 8 is to pay attention to how you're facing the image. You want to either needle felt straight down and look straight down at your image, or get it across from you, like so that you're looking at it this way, needle felting across from you, and avoid weird angles. I know one time I was needle felting a big picture of a bull, and I sat with it in my lap, but the picture was like this big. Needle felted this bull and worked on it session after session after session, and never did what I'm going to suggest, and that's put your picture up on a shelf or lean it so that when you walk into your room, you're facing the picture and you can look at it straight on how it will be viewed eventually. Because I didn't do this and I was always looking down at an angle, when I stood it up, his face was all wonky and weird because the dimensions were just off because I was needle felting from a weird angle. So pay attention to your angle while you're needle felting, especially if you're trying to get dimension into a piece like a face or something that you really got to get that perspective right. Number 9, leave your piece in place until it's fully needle felted and finished. Way back in the day when I first started, the foam was terrible, and we make a much nicer quality now. We just bought what we could get back then. The foam was terrible and the wool would get all embedded, so we were constantly needle felting, peeling it up, needle felting, peeling it up. The reason we suggest you don't do that now is because the substrate usually can handle it, but also, especially if you're making something really detailed, if you peel it up, then it gets a little bulky on the back and never sits completely flush, and that impacts your ability to get great detail. So just leave it in place until you're finished. When you're ready to remove your piece from your work surface, peel it back at a shallow angle. Try not to stretch and pull and tug too much because you will distort the fabric. If your weave is loose or your fiber is coarse and not, well attached, when you peel it up, you may need to do some touch-ups. Most of the time you don't if it's flat and used a great fabric as well, and all of the material was well connected, meaning the fibers with the fabric, but peel it back gently. My last tip is to iron your finished piece. If your piece is flat and maybe it's going to be a pillow or mounted behind glass or even on a greeting card or something, you will marvel at how beautiful it looks after you've given it a nice steam press. If it's dimensional or bumpy or bulgy at all, don't iron it because then you'll just smush everything out. But iron your final piece and see how beautiful it looks. That was my top 10 tips and techniques. I'm probably way long-winded because you can tell I'm really passionate about sharing this with you and getting all of this information to you. Remember that you can download the PDF down below. So if I missed anything or you can't remember what I said or you just want a reference, you'll have it in your hands and you'll have links to everything we shared as well. These are easy beginner projects for needle felting your first picture. We have a great playlist here on YouTube that you can check out, and these are super beginner friendly. There are tutorials, there are kits to go with them, and if you follow the link for today's video, you'll land at our tutorials page for this lesson. You can grab the PDF I mentioned, and you can also browse our variety of not only kits but tools and materials that we mentioned in this video. We have lots of things, whether you're looking for something to do with the kids or grandkids or just do yourself. I'm a very elementary artist. I like to keep things pretty basic, and now and again I like to step my toe into something a little more complicated just for fun and to test my skill, like my realistic pet portraits. But we just want you to have a good time. So try one of these kits or tutorials to get yourself going and explore. And if you're ready, or when you're ready for your next level project, check out some of these beautiful tutorials we have at feltingtutorials.com. Some very talented artists and teachers have shared their time and energy with us to give you some great skills in needle felting your own beautiful pictures, from landscapes to portraits. And honestly, we just can't wait to see what you make. I hope today's been informative for you, and if you had a good time, we hope you'll hit the subscribe button. And if you're looking for your next quick watch, check out this video right here.